put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The boy who convinced the world he was a savior. In the marble corridors of wealth, where fortunes are made with a keystroke and empires rise overnight, there exists a particular kind of danger. Not the danger of visible violence or overt criminality, but something far more insidious. The slow, methodical construction of an illusion so perfect that even the architects begin to believe it. On November 11th, 2022, a 30-year-old man in cargo shorts watched $32 billion evaporate in 72 hours. His name was Sam Bankman-Fried, and he had just orchestrated what federal prosecutors would call one of the largest financial frauds in American history. But here's what makes this story truly terrifying. For years, the smartest people in the world had lined up to give him their money, convinced they were witnessing the birth of a visionary. The question isn't how he fooled them. The question is, what does it say about the machinery of modern wealth that such a spectacular deception was not only possible, but celebrated? Sam Bankman-Fried understood something fundamental about power in the digital age. That perception, carefully cultivated, could become reality. The son of 2 Stanford law professors, he emerged from the prestigious halls of MIT with a physics degree and an unsettling clarity about human psychology. While his classmates dreamed of changing the world through technology or medicine, Sam saw a different path, one that wound through the shadowy corridors of quantitative trading, where algorithms make split-second decisions that move billions. His first stop was Jane Street Capital, a secretive trading firm where young mathematicians learn to extract profit from market inefficiencies, invisible to ordinary investors. But the real education came later, at Alameda Research, the trading firm he founded in 2017. In the Wild West landscape of cryptocurrency markets, Alameda discovered something remarkable: price discrepancies between exchanges that could be exploited for guaranteed returns. They called it arbitrage, a strategy as old as markets themselves. But in crypto's fractured ecosystem, it was a license to print money. Sam made his first millions here, in the gaps between perception and reality, between what Bitcoin cost in America and what it sold for in Japan. It was a fitting introduction to an empire that would be built entirely on such gaps. By 2019, Sam had seen the limitations of existing cryptocurrency exchanges: clunky interfaces, suspicious reliability, the constant shadow of hacking and theft. More importantly, he saw an opportunity. FTX launched in May of that year, positioned as the professionals' exchange, the platform where serious traders could operate with the sophistication they demanded. The branding was immaculate, sleek, modern, trustworthy, in an industry drowning in scams. But the real genius was in the architecture of trust Sam constructed around himself. While other crypto entrepreneurs flaunted Lamborghinis and private jets, Sam drove a Toyota Corolla. While they bought mansions, he slept on a beanbag in his office. And crucially, while they spoke in the vague utopian language of decentralization and freedom, Sam talked about effective altruism, the philosophical movement dedicated to using wealth to do the maximum possible good. He pledged to give away his fortune, positioning himself not as another crypto profiteer, but as a reluctant billionaire, someone who accumulated wealth only as a tool for global salvation. The media loved it. Here, finally, was a crypto founder you could trust, a Boy Scout in an industry of pirates. Fortune magazine put him on their cover. He testified before Congress. He hosted world leaders in the Bahamas, where FTX had established its headquarters in a sprawling penthouse overlooking turquoise waters. And behind this carefully constructed facade of altruistic capitalism, something else was growing in the shadows. The money flowed in torrents. Sequoia Capital, one of Silicon Valley's most respected firms, invested $213 million and wrote a fawning profile titled, "Sam Bankman-Fried has a savior complex, and maybe you should too." BlackRock, the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, SoftBank, the titans of global finance, lined up to participate in FTX's rise. At its peak in January 2022, FTX was valued at $32 billion, making Sam one of the richest people on Earth before his 31st birthday. The company spent lavishly on marketing, a 5-year, $135 million deal to name the Miami Heat's arena, Super Bowl commercials featuring Larry David and Tom Brady, sponsorships across professional sports. FTX was everywhere, and Sam became the face of crypto's maturation into mainstream respectability. He played video games during television interviews, affecting an air of distracted genius. He spoke rapidly about complex trading strategies and the moral imperative of wealth accumulation for philanthropic purposes. And in private, in the penthouse in the Bahamas where Sam lived with 9 other FTX executives, an arrangement he called efficient, the real business was being conducted. Alameda Research, Sam's trading firm, was supposed to be a completely separate entity from FTX. One was an exchange, a neutral platform where others traded. The other was a proprietary trading firm, making its own bets. The separation was fundamental. Allowing Alameda special access to FTX customer funds would be like a casino letting a preferred gambler raid the house's vault. But in the shadows of that Bahamas penthouse, with its drug-fueled work sessions and polyamorous relationship entanglements, that line had been obliterated. Here's where the story takes its first dark turn, where the illusion begins to crack and reveal the machinery of deception underneath. Carolyn Ellison, the CEO of Alameda Research and Sam's on-again, off-again girlfriend, knew the truth that billions in customer deposits were being funneled from FTX into Alameda's trading accounts, not as loans, clearly disclosed and properly documented, but as a secret reservoir of capital that Alameda could deploy at will. The mechanism was elegantly simple and utterly fraudulent. Alameda had a special exemption in FTX's risk management system, allowing it to maintain a negative balance of up to $65 billion. In practical terms, this meant Alameda could withdraw FTX customer funds without triggering the automated safeguards that would stop any other user. And withdraw they did. By mid-2022, Alameda had borrowed more than $10 billion from FTX, not from FTX's corporate coffers, but from the accounts of ordinary customers who believed their cryptocurrency was sitting safely in digital wallets. The money financed everything. Risky trading positions, venture capital investments in over 200 startups, personal loans to executives, political donations that made Sam one of the largest contributors to the 2022 midterm elections. But most catastrophically, it propped up the value of FTT, FTX's own cryptocurrency token. Alameda's balance sheet, what little existed of it, was heavily weighted with FTT, a token Sam had essentially created out of thin air, and which Alameda now held in vast quantities. This created a circular dependency of terrifying fragility. FTX's valuation depended on FTT's price. Alameda's solvency depended on FTT's price, and FTT's price depended entirely on continued confidence in FTX. It was a house of cards built on digital quicksand, and the slightest tremor would bring it all down. The tremor came from an unexpected direction. A rival who understood the game better than most. Changpeng Zhao, the CEO of Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, had been watching FTX's meteoric rise with interest. Binance had been an early investor in FTX, but Sam had bought them out in 2021, and tensions between the two platforms had grown. On November 2, 2022, CoinDesk published a leaked document that sent shockwaves through the industry. Caroline Ellison's Alameda Research balance sheet showed that most of its $14 billion in assets consisted of FTT tokens and other FTX-created instruments. In other words, the trading firm's wealth existed primarily as tokens from its sister company, self-referential value, with no real foundation. Zhao saw his opening. On November 6th, he announced that Binance would sell its entire position of FTT tokens, worth approximately $500 million, citing recent revelations. It was a calculated strike, and Sam knew immediately what it meant. The announcement triggered a cascade of fear. If the world's largest exchange was dumping FTT, what did they know? Within hours, customers began withdrawing their funds from FTX. First a trickle, then a flood, then a tsunami. On November 7th, customers requested $4 billion in withdrawals. On November 8th, $5 billion more. And Sam, sitting in his penthouse, desperately trying to raise emergency funding, had to confront a terrible reality. The money wasn't there. FTX couldn't process the withdrawals because the customer deposits had already been spent, traded away, used to plug holes in Alameda's failing positions. The exchange froze withdrawals, and the digital world watched in horror as one of the industry's most trusted platforms revealed itself as hollow. In the frantic 72 hours that followed, Sam executed a desperate campaign of damage control that only deepened the criminal liability he would later face. He reached out to Zhao, proposing a bailout, a merger, anything to stop the bleeding. Binance initially agreed to acquire FTX, a stunning reversal that briefly steadied the panic. But when Zhao's team began due diligence, looking under the hood of FTX's financials, they discovered the full scope of the catastrophe. Billions in customer funds missing, commingled accounts, non-existent record-keeping. Within 24 hours, Binance walked away. Sam tried to raise emergency funding from other investors, but the calls went unanswered. The same Silicon Valley titans who had praised his vision weeks earlier now treated him like a plague carrier. And on Twitter, in a series of increasingly unhinged posts, Sam tried to assure customers that assets are fine and withdrawals would resume, even as his lawyers were telling him the company was insolvent to the tune of $8 billion. On November 11th, 2022, FTX filed for bankruptcy. The implosion was complete, from a $32 billion valuation to worthless in less than 2 weeks. Over 1 million creditors had lost their money, their Bitcoin and Ethereum and life savings locked in an exchange that had promised safety and delivered devastation. But the truly chilling aspect was still emerging. And here we reach the second darkness, the revelation that transforms this from a business failure into a chronicle of deliberate criminality and moral bankruptcy. As bankruptcy proceedings began and investigators started piecing together the remains of FTX, a picture emerged that was far worse than a simple case of mismanagement or bad trading decisions. John Ray III, the new CEO brought in to oversee the bankruptcy, the same attorney who had handled the Enron liquidation, said he had never seen such a complete failure of corporate controls in his career. There were no board meetings, no accounting department worthy of the name, no separation between personal and corporate funds. Sam and his inner circle had used FTX as their personal piggy bank, spending customer money on Bahamas real estate worth $300 million, political contributions, venture capital investments in companies Sam liked, even a $38 million stake in a company co-founded by one of his closest friends. But the most damning evidence came from signal messages and internal documents that prosecutors later obtained. They showed that Sam and Caroline had discussed, in explicit terms, the use of customer deposits to cover Alameda's losses. They showed that Sam had directed the creation of secret backdoors in FTX's code that allowed Alameda to borrow unlimited customer funds without triggering alarms. They showed that when concerns were raised internally, they were dismissed or ignored. This wasn't negligence. It was fraud, executed methodically over years, hidden behind a performance of ethical capitalism and effective altruism. Sam had claimed he wanted to make billions to give it away to effective causes. But the truth was simpler and darker. He wanted the power that billions provide, the access, the influence, the ability to shape reality itself. The altruism was just another layer of the illusion. Sam fled to the Bahamas, giving bizarre media interviews where he claimed he didn't knowingly commingle funds and had simply made mistakes in a fast-moving environment. He apologized profusely while simultaneously denying criminal intent. A tightrope walk that prosecutors would later shred in court. On December 12, 2022, Bahamas authorities arrested him at the request of the U.S. government. He was charged with wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. A litany of financial crimes that carried potential sentences totaling over 100 years in prison. His former colleagues began cooperating with prosecutors, one by one, as the walls closed in. Caroline Ellison, his ex-girlfriend who had run Alameda, pleaded guilty and testified against him. Gary Wang, FTX's co-founder and chief technology officer, pleaded guilty and testified that Sam had directed him to create the special exemptions that allowed Alameda to raid customer funds. Nishad Singh, another top executive, pleaded guilty and described how Sam had used FTX customer money for political donations that were often made in other people's names, a violation of campaign finance law on top of everything else. The trial, which began in October 2023, became a masterclass in prosecutorial efficiency. Sam took the stand in his own defense, a high-risk decision that his lawyers reportedly advised against. For 3 days, he tried to maintain the persona of the absent-minded genius who had simply lost track of where customer money ended up. But under cross-examination, that performance crumbled. Prosecutors confronted him with his own messages, his own directives, his own lies to investors and customers and regulators. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 7 counts. On March 28, 2024, Judge Lewis Kaplan sentenced Sam Bankman-Fried to 25 years in federal prison. In his sentencing remarks, Judge Kaplan addressed something that cut to the heart of Sam's defense: the claim that no one was actually harmed because customers might be repaid through the bankruptcy process. There is absolutely no doubt that Mr. Bankman-Fried's name right now is pretty much mud around the world, the judge said. But the idea that customers and investors would be fully compensated was misleading, logically flawed, and speculative. More importantly, Kaplan noted something chilling. Sam had shown no real remorse, had lied repeatedly on the stand, and had demonstrated a willingness to commit fraud again if given the opportunity. The message was clear. This wasn't about a young entrepreneur who made mistakes, but about a sophisticated fraudster who had weaponized his intelligence and his carefully crafted public image to commit crimes at an unprecedented scale. The cryptocurrency industry, already reeling from a brutal market downturn, now had to contend with its most public face being exposed as a criminal. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the FTX collapse isn't the fraud itself. It's what it reveals about the ecosystem that enabled it. The same venture capital firms that conducted thorough due diligence before investing billions in FTX somehow missed, or chose to ignore, that the company had no proper accounting, no independent board, and was run by a group of 20-somethings living together in a Bahamas penthouse. The same regulatory bodies that hauled Sam before Congress to discuss cryptocurrency regulation failed to notice that his exchange was operating as a house of cards. The same media outlets that published glowing profiles of Sam as the good crypto billionaire never asked the fundamental question: in an industry built on speculation and hype, how exactly was FTX generating returns that justified a $32 billion valuation? The answer, of course, is that it wasn't. FTX was generating returns by stealing customer money and gambling with it, then using accounting tricks and token manipulation to hide the theft. But asking that question would have required skepticism, would have demanded proof, would have disrupted the narrative of crypto's inevitable triumph. And in a world where perception shapes billions in investment decisions, skepticism is expensive. Sam understood this intuitively. He knew that if he looked the part, the hoodie-wearing, beanbag-sleeping, effective altruism-preaching boy genius, the substance underneath mattered less. He knew that in the modern age of financial power, performance has become indistinguishable from reality, at least until the performance ends and the bill comes due. In the aftermath of FTX's collapse, investigators discovered approximately $1 billion in cash hidden in various accounts, a tiny fraction of what had been lost, but still real money that might partially compensate victims. The bankruptcy process continues, unwinding the tangled web of entities and investments and real estate purchases that Sam had financed with other people's money. Caroline Ellison received 2 years in prison for her cooperation. Gary Wang and Nishad Singh are awaiting sentencing, likely to receive substantial leniency for their testimony against Sam. The Bahamas penthouse sits empty now, its beanbag chairs and high-end gaming computers, artifacts of an empire that existed for a moment, and then vanished like cryptocurrency itself. Value asserted, but never real. And Sam, in a federal prison cell, has decades to contemplate the gap between the person he presented to the world and the person who systematically stole $8 billion from people who trusted him. But here's what should keep us awake at night. What makes this more than just another story of financial fraud and fallen empires? Sam Bankman-Fried is not an aberration. He is a product of a system that rewards narrative over substance, perception over reality, growth over sustainability. He emerged from the most prestigious institutions, was funded by the most sophisticated investors, and was celebrated by the most influential media. At every stage, the machinery that should have questioned him instead elevated him. And when the collapse came, when the fraud was exposed, the same institutions that had built him up expressed shock and promised to do better next time. But will they? Or will there simply be another Sam, another FTX, another performance so polished that we choose to believe it because belief is easier than skepticism? And skepticism doesn't get you in on the ground floor of the next $32 billion company. The real dark side of business isn't the fraudsters. It's the system that consistently fails to recognize them until after the damage is done. Sam Bankman-Fried stole billions, but the industry that enabled him remains largely unchanged, ready to crown the next genius, fund the next revolution, believe the next carefully constructed illusion. In the marble corridors of wealth, where fortunes are made with a keystroke and empires rise overnight, there will always be another Sam, another fiction waiting to be believed, another catastrophe waiting to happen. The only question is whether we'll see it coming. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.